Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce you to English economist, journalist, and presenter for BBC, Evan Davis. He joined the BBC in 1993 as a general economic correspondent for news programs. He then served as economic editor at Newsnight before going to become the BBC economic editor, the most senior economic post in BBC. In September 2014, he became Newsnight's lead presenter. Evan also presents The Bottom Line, Radio 4's business discussion program, and Dragon's Den, the BBC 2 business reality show. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the host of today's forum, Evan Davis.
Thank you so much, and it is a real pleasure to be here. This is my 4th trip to Prague, and I have to say, every time I come, it just looks a little bit more affluent and a little bit more sprightly, a little bit cleaner, and a little bit better. So it is really nice to be here. Real pleasure, and thank you so much for inviting me to moderate today's event. I hope you're prepared for some hard work, because it is quite an intense agenda we have for you this afternoon. But then you're rewarded with a cocktail at the end of it all. But you've got to get through to 5:30. There is a coffee break, but you're going to be working hard. And I do hope that you will participate. To get that cocktail, you have to make some contributions, okay? So we will leave plenty of time for your experiences, your stories, and your questions to our very excellent panels. I go to a lot of business conferences, and I go to some gay conferences, and it's really nice to be at one that kind of combines those two themes. Quite often at the business conferences, people are trying to work out how you make this economy or that economy more like Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is probably the most productive little portion of the world that currently exists. It's not very big. I mean, it's not very small, but it's not very big. And it just generates billion-dollar companies month after month. There is something in the air in Silicon Valley that has really worked for the world economy and for Silicon Valley over the last few decades. And people all want a little piece of that magic. And I sometimes say, are you aware that Silicon Valley is right next door to the gayest city on the planet? Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. And why is that not a coincidence? It is because in the modern wealth-creating sectors, the pieces of the economy where value is generated at the moment, these are sectors that need imagination, they need flair, they need original thinking, they need ideas, they need youthful vibrancy, they need to be inventive, and they need to be problem-solving. And there are 2 qualities that generate all those features. One is the unconventional, and the second is the tolerant. It's the unconventional, it's thinking differently, questioning assumptions that sometimes arrives at solutions that thinking inside the box fails to arrive at. It's interesting, in the Industrial Revolution in the UK, in the 17th, 18th century, it was nonconformists. It was the religious nonconformists who were the great entrepreneurs rather than the conformists. And in Silicon Valley, it's nonconformists who seem to create value. Steve Jobs, he wasn't gay, but Steve Jobs was something of a hippie, trying LSD, doing all sorts of things that wouldn't have been allowed if he had been in Singapore, okay? Singapore would not have created Apple, but California could create Apple. But the other quality is tolerance, because if you're solving problems, if you are trying to arrive at wacky, different, imaginative solutions, you need people sometimes to say, that's a good idea, or to listen to their colleagues rather than try and play silly power games or to put them down. So tolerance, too, are the kinds of another very important feature of the kind of economy we're all trying to create. Now, it's not true of all industries. I mean, you know, if you're building a nuclear power station, you don't want people trying LSD, and you don't want people who are trying to do their own thing and think outside the box. You just want them to build the bloody nuclear power station and do it by the rules. However, my contention is that when it comes to growing businesses, the ones that are more important in the world economy, it's tolerance and unconventional thinking that are attributes that are becoming more important. So that is a sort of introduction to some of the themes that we're going to be talking about today. As I say, you're going to be busy, you're going to have panel discussions, you're going to have some talks, you're going to listen, you're going to ask questions, you're going to work hard, and we're going to have a very fruitful discussion in which everybody on the stage and off the stage, hopefully, will learn from each other. But to start us off, we're going to have a short talk and then some questions and then a panel. And Lord John Browne from the UK is going to set out his experience. Now, I am a journalist in the UK. Business, economics, that's my specialist area. And really, from the 1990s through to the 2000s, John Browne was Britain's top businessman. He came regularly top of all the business league tables, the most admired chief executive, and he was chief executive of Britain's biggest company, British Petroleum, BP. He was very, very admired. And then there was this most spectacular news story about John Browne. And I remember hearing about it privately in a discussion at the BBC, and it was, there's a story going around about Lord Browne, and I'm not going to tell it to you because I'm going to hope that he will tell you some of that story. And we were like, wow. And within a couple of months, Lord John Browne had lost his job, but discovered his life. And I'm going to get him to tell you that story, and then we'll take some questions, because I think there are a lot of lessons to be drawn from it, and it led to his book, which you've already heard about, The Glass Closet, and I think has had a big influence on thinking in the UK. So please welcome Lord John Browne.
Evan, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. It's very, very good to be in Prague, where I've been also 4 times. This is my 4th visit. I wrote a book called The Glass Closet, which has, I think, as I put it correctly, pleased my publisher, which is good. You always have to please your publisher because they have to recover their costs. I wrote the book because of several reasons. First is a very good friend of mine told me I had to, and she kept banging on my head until I did it. And secondly, I looked around and I saw something very strange, because I was going to write a book about my experiences and about being gay in business. And when I was writing the book, I looked around in business, and I suddenly realized there were no out gay CEOs. So I thought this was very strange. There must be something in the water, because with 1,000 companies, you'd expect, statistically, a few out gay CEOs. And this seems to be statistically impossible, what I saw. So it struck me that while we've made great progress, and I'm always a great optimist, I believe the rights of LGBT people have come an enormous way. The glass is very much half full. In this particular subset called business, something wasn't quite right. So I thought I'd write a book, and I thought I'd write a book about what happened to me, about what business should do, about role models, what CEOs should do, and start a bit of a movement. And I decided, because there were no gay CEOs, it seemed to be incompatible, except maybe me, I'd write a book to the straight majority and figure out where we'd go from there. I was born just after the Second World War to a very peculiar set of parents, an English soldier and a Hungarian mother who'd managed to survive Auschwitz. One of the things she told me from the very beginning was that you should always keep a secret to yourself, never tell anyone a secret, because they're guaranteed to use it against you. And secondly, never be an identifiable minority, because when the going gets tough, the majority always hurts the minority. So those were a couple of lessons, and I grew up and realized I was gay. I also looked around, and it wasn't decriminalized in the UK until '67. I was at university then, and I made a firm decision that this secret will stay with me. And so I began to build two lives. I built a life as a person in business, a person in society who was asexual, and then I had a very private and deep life from time to time as a gay man. It was quite thrilling to start with. It felt like being James Bond. You know, you have two lives, a legend and the reality, and it was great fun. And it taught me a lot about how to sense danger, how to read people very carefully, very quickly, because it was a survival skill. And that went on quite merrily for a very long time, until I could carry on a private life. But then I became reasonably well known, and it was very difficult to keep anything secret. So I decided to take extreme measures and begin to make some very, very bad decisions indeed. I realized that I couldn't go out and expose myself, so I decided that I would, as it were, have people come visit me. So a very primitive internet site. I had people come, and they were all escorts. So I came, and then secondly, I made a relationship with one. And that was all seemed to be fine. And then we broke up, and then one day I got a telephone call from a well-known tabloid newspaper on a Friday evening. That's normally the technique, Friday evening, for Sunday publication. Actually, the phone call went to BP's press office, and they said they've got 50-odd questions they'd like to ask Lord Browne, and they were all about the story and what to do. So the press office were alarmed. They sent me the questions. I was away. I decided I'd take out a super injunction, one of those things you could do at the time, violation of my privacy rights, and I did just that. And in so doing, I was so ashamed of what I'd done, I actually lied to the lawyer and said I met this guy not on a website but exercising in Battersea Park, which was a cover story I'd used previously to even very close friends. Anyway, the injunction proceeded along and we weren't allowed to talk to anybody, and clearly it was going to fail in the end. And on May the 1st of 2007, the story came out, that I'd made these errors of judgment, that I was gay, and I concluded that as the story went out, I would resign. I didn't ask anyone whether I should. I just did, because I didn't want the company to go through what turned out to be, in a British understatement, a reasonably large story. In fact, it was a very big storm in the press, and confined me, as it were, to barracks for 3 days. I couldn't go out because people with very large telephoto lenses followed me around on motorbikes to get photographs. So this was all, to me, very rational. I kept my private life to myself because I felt it was mine. I thought that if someone knew I was gay, I wouldn't be able to do business, certainly in the oil business. I wouldn't be treated with respect in the Middle East or anywhere, but actually my colleagues wouldn't respect me and I couldn't possibly do business. And actually, come to think about it, given that I've been inauthentic for so long, I'd lose all my friends. So what did happen in May the 1st? It turned out quite the reverse. So a lot of people came and supported me. There were letters to the press about why this was all wrong, and in my support, I had hundreds of letters and emails. And indeed, after the paparazzi had gone home, as they always do, I went out walking in London, and I kept being stopped in the street by people, strangers, saying, "We're right behind you. We want to support you." And that went on, amazingly, for about a year. So the first reason I wrote the book was to say to people, this story was not a very good idea. And actually, it might be excusable in the context of when I grew up, but actually the context kept changing, and I didn't realize the context had kept changing. And life had moved on, but I'd invested so much for these two lives that I couldn't bring myself to bring them to one. And nobody could talk to me about it. And strangely, when I was presenting this book in a literary festival in Hay, on Wye, on the border of Wales, a man stood up in the audience. He's younger than I was. He'd been in the oil industry about 20 years and not working for BP. And he said, "You know, John, the thing was, we all kind of knew you were gay, but we couldn't figure out how to tell you. And I wish they'd had, and that would have made a very big difference." So that's the first point. Second point is, I think it's easier, rather than lecture people about why they should do something, for example, to come out in business, is to show them that if they do, it's successful by role modeling. And my second purpose of my book was to try and bring out role models, of which there were very few. I mean, look, there were no openly gay CEOs when I started. As I published the book, there were 3, which was fantastic, including Tim Cook of Silicon Valley. So that was a little bit of progress, not a lot, but a little bit of progress. But role models are very important. They're part of almost anything in business. It's better to show people an example, a case history, case study, or better still, a warm human body that actually has done something that is what you want to do. Not exactly, but a little bits and pieces from different role models gives people confidence that what they're about to do is the right thing. And coming out, it can be risky. And so role models were really very important, and I wanted to make the point that we had to make role models around the world. My book is full of stories of how people came out badly and well, mostly well. Most of people's deep-seated fears do not come about. They tend to be a little theoretical. The third thing I wanted to do was to write to CEOs. And I wanted to say to them, I think you've got some duties here, and you've got some advantages. The big duty of CEOs, of course, is to set the tone and direction after consultation in business, and that's what they needed to do here. They really needed to say that inclusion was on the agenda. It was an important thing that they wanted to stand behind, and they wanted inclusion of LGBT people to be part of a corporate agenda. And they had to do that, and they had to measure the impact of their words primarily on how people use their time, subsidiary managers use their time, and how much time they spent on LGBT inclusion. And there was a reason for this, and the reason was a business reason. When you look at companies that have engaged teams, and that's measurable by surveys, being measured over 20 years, and compare them with unengaged teams, those companies do very well. In fact, they produce a return of about 2% differentially each year. That is an enormous amount of money. And engagement requires inclusion, because if people aren't included, they can't possibly be engaged with the deeper purpose of the company, and actually everybody worries that maybe I'll be in an out clique at some stage in my career. So this is a very important point, I think, that CEOs should absorb. It's really about deep engagement, and having LGBT people included is part of that, a very important part. Second part is well known to people, which is about diversity of thought, about the war for talent, getting people of different backgrounds in to a company, reinforcing what Evan said at the beginning. And my fourth point really was about starting a movement. latching on to the successes of the day, the changes of ideas and thoughts. And again, at another literary festival, I had, after I was finished talking, a middle-aged couple came up to the stage for me to sign a book, a man and a woman, and they said to me, well, I'd like you to sign this book to our son because we would like him to come out. And I'd like you just to think about that. Just think about the change in context, the change in environment that allows this to happen. So a movement is about trying to make that work inside companies. And I feel by repeating the story, and my experience in business is you can never repeat things enough times. You have to repeat the same thing again and again and again. And then you begin to get change happening. So repeating the same thing is important. Getting people to make role models is important. Getting regulation so that people are required to report how many people voluntarily disclose being LGBT on boards or on management committees would, I believe, create a further vista in inclusion. So those were the 4 points I wanted to make this afternoon, and I think I should now sit down and let you ask questions.